And of course, Amy leaves the whole sex story for me to deliver. So, yes, she loves to say things that she knows nothing that what she means until it comes out, and then she's like, "Oh, right." So, anyway, okay. Yes, I see that Pastor Stephanie looked over the crowd really well, so we should be good there. So, today we find ourselves seeing David at a point in his life that is the twilight of the darkest moments that he will go through in his life. And when we look at the story of David and Bathsheba, we think, how much worse could it get, right? But this is just the dusk before the midnight. I want to give you that warning as we continue through the story of David. But when we look back on David's life, we see that David goes from this man who is totally and completely minded in God's ways, right? He asks God how he should fight his battles. He does not even bother want to touch Saul, because if he touches Saul, he's touching God's anointed. He has God's order in mind, right? And as he goes through his life, we see him stumble, and he decides to move the ark of God back to Jerusalem without asking God how it should be done, right? And because of that, poor Uzzah was a dead, right? And so, but as soon as that happens, what does David do? He turns right back to God and says, "God, what did I do wrong? Why did this happen?" And he immediately corrects the situation. God tells him what to do, and he does it, right? Well, as we get more and more familiar with things, we find that we will put ourselves in that same situation, and we find ourselves becoming more and more lax in the things that we do, right? So today, we are going to, let me ask this question. Has anybody here, by show of hands, never sinned? Okay, good, because I'd have to call you out to be a liar, because 1 John 1:18 says, if anyone says they haven't sinned, then they're a liar, and the truth is not in them. So I'm so glad I don't have to start the day out that way. All right. So today's sermon I've titled, The Lifecycle of Sin and Restoration. Okay? And we're going to start in 2 Samuel chapter 11, right from the beginning. So in the spring of the year, when kings normally go to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed, was walking on the roof of the palace, and as he looked over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. All right? So our life cycle of sin starts like this. Sin sprouts when we don't do what we should do, where we should be doing it. Okay, let me repeat that. Sin sprouts when we don't do what we should do, where we should be doing it. Okay? How many of us have gone through something, and all of a sudden we turn around and we wonder, how in the world did I get here? Right? David finds himself in this situation right now. You'll notice in verse 1, and my nose just started running like a sieve. Here we go. Thank you. I'm gonna have this whole thing up here because who knows how much is gonna come out today. Who was it that said they were sneezing this morning? Alyssa. Doggone her. Power of suggestion. There you go. All right. So it starts out where in the springtime, when kings normally go to war, David stays home. All right? We'll see that David's getting lackadaisical in his kingship, right? He's starting to send others out to do the things that he should be overseeing. He sends Joab, right, his trusted comrade in arms, to go out and to lead his armies as they're going into battle. while he stays home and looks over all of the things that he has built. Now, I really emphasize that he has built because we're going to find out later what the real story is, okay? So he looks over his city, and here's a little spoiler alert. This is a hint of the pride that's growing in David's heart, okay? In chapter 24, I believe, you'll find that David takes a census because of the pride of how large his kingdom has grown, okay? But that's a story for another time, but it's indicative of what's happening in David's heart right now. So David's at home looking over all the things that he has built. And Joab is out leading his armies. Has anybody in here ever seen a 1970s film? I know some of you didn't know they made films in 1970. Called Apocalypse Now. Okay? It's an iconic film from the 70s of a war film. And in it, Robert Duvall plays a character, Lieutenant Colonel, I always have to look up the name, Kilgore. And in this movie, he has a montage, and he goes through and he stands up. The war is going on all around him, and he says, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. And he goes on through his monologue, and at the end he says, it smells like victory. David does not get to enjoy the smell of napalm in the morning with his troops. He doesn't get to have any more songs written about him, about the next 1,000 that he killed. He doesn't get to enjoy the victory of the battles at the end of the day because he has delegated all that away. In fact, at the end of chapter 12, maybe into chapter 13, you find out that after everything is all done and the city of Ammon has been captured, then Joab waits before any treaties are signed. He sends for David, and then David goes back, and he gets to come at the very end and receive the victory. Okay, that's the level of lackadaisical that David has become. So, while David is perusing his city, looking over all the things, he turns and he sees this absolutely gorgeous, drop-dead babe sitting out bathing on her rooftop, and he sits there and he says, "Oh, mama." Okay, at this point, I'm serious. This is what happens. David is completely hooked at this point. There's no reeling him back. If you're a cartoon enthusiast like I was, the wolf head pops out of his head, the tongue unrolls on the ground, eyeballs, right? David is completely hooked. Completely hooked. And there is no turning back. All right? So if we go on to verse 3, David, he sent out someone to find out who she was. And he was told, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now let me note right here. When does he find out she's married? Right here. Verse 3. Okay? So verse 4. Then David sent messengers to get her, and she came to his palace, and he slept with her. She had just completed the purification rites after her menstrual period, and then she returned home. For those of you who don't know, the rites, Lou, you went to the wrong play here, man. For those of you who don't know, back in that time, after women had their menstruation period, they would go through a ritual cleansing. This was about a week or so after they stopped menstruating. What happens 1 to 2 weeks after that period? Ovulation, right? What happens if you happen to be doing the deed with somebody at ovulation? The end of verse 5. Later, when Bathsheba discovered she was pregnant, she sent word to David, I'm pregnant. Good news, right? Joy, if we have new life coming, right? That's not what David or Bathsheba are thinking at this moment, right? So the second thing in the life cycle of sin. Sin matures when we don't nip it in the bud. Just like Barney Fife would say, you gotta nip it in the bud, right? That phrase is an agricultural term, and it means as soon as the first sprout of life shows, you cut it off, you rip it out, and you stop it from growing before it gets too big. Right? That's nipping it in the bud. As soon as you first see it, stop it. Get it out of there. All right, let's go back to the oh mama moment here. Had David allowed his eyes to bounce, and I'm not talking about bouncing up and down, checking her out head to foot. Okay, I'm talking when your eyes land on something they ought not be on, they bounce away. Okay? Imagine for a moment, you walk into a room and you find your parents doing something that you really wish you hadn't even known they were doing. And immediately your eyes bounce away before what you see sears to the back of your skull, and you want to pluck the eyes from your head, wash them off, and hope when you put them back in, that image is gone, right? Okay, this is letting your eyes bounce. David didn't do such a thing, right? He lingered. He sat there. He started playing in his mind all the plans. How can I make this happen, right? So in the end, Bathsheba ends up pregnant. So the next step in the life cycle of sin is that sin multiplies when we try to hide it. Okay? The verses that follow, David devises a plan to get Uriah to come home. And he is just certain, you know what? I'll send for Uriah. He'll come back. And it's been a long time. He's been in the trenches with all these smelly men, fighting battles. He'll come back and he'll get to his home and he'll get cleaned up. And he'll see his drop-dead, gorgeous wife. And she'll have her perfume on. And he will cover up the deed that I have done. He'll sleep with her, and then I'll be off the hook. Everybody will just assume what happened. All is good, right? Well, what happens is Uriah, after coming and whining and dining with the king, because you don't say no to the king, right? He wines and dines with the king. The king says, Uriah, go on home now. Enjoy yourself. He sends him a gift to take back, and Uriah leaves his presence, and he goes and he stays with the palace guards. And he sleeps out in the open of the gate that night. Okay? No matter what David does, he even gets him drunk, thinking, if I get him drunk, he'll be a little more in the mood, per se, right? And get back and do the thing that I want him to do with his wife that he should be wanting to do, right? But again, Uriah goes back and stays with the palace guard. So David asks him, Uriah, why is it that you aren't going back to your house? And that brings us to verse 11. Uriah replied, the ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living out in tents. And Joab, my master's men, are camping in the open fields. How could I go home and wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear that I would never do such a thing. I think at this point, there are several Bible scholars that believe this. Uriah has gotten wind of what has happened. There's rumors about that things aren't just so kosher between the king and Bathsheba. And so Uriah stays with the temple guard because he wants everybody to see that he never went home. He wants everybody to know that whatever happens in 9 months wasn't because of him, okay? So he gets there with King David, and David asks him that question. It's as though Uriah is saying, but King, I would never do all of these things that you have done. Coals are being heaped upon David's head at this point. So David thinks back. His plan A has failed, and now he has to come up with plan B. And this is what plan B is. Verse 14. So the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. Now, pay attention to what letter Uriah is carrying with him. In the letter, Joab was instructed, station Uriah at the front lines where the battle is fiercest. Then pull back so that he'll be killed. So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. And when the enemy soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed along with several other Israelite soldiers. David has just experienced an ultimate truth of sin. Sin will take you further than you wanted to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you're willing to pay. Okay? You want me to say that again, just to get it in? Sin will take you further than you want to go, keep you longer than you wanted to stay, and cost you more than you wanted to pay. Okay? At the beginning of this, David, he just wanted to bring Uriah back, have him sleep with his wife, and the whole nasty mess would be done. But now, as we get to verse 17, we see that not only has David committed adultery, trying to cover it up, he devises the murder of an innocent man. He enlists unknowingly the help of the Ammonites, causing the guilt to fall on them. He also enlists the help of Joab, causing the guilt to fall on him as well. And in the process, loses 10, 20, 30 additional soldiers. All because of what he's trying to cover up. So sin multiplies when we try to hide it. Now, when you think about what Joab did, you're wondering, why didn't he do what David specifically instructed him? But Joab was wily, okay? There's this weird relationship where David trusts Joab implicitly, but Joab has moments of some underhandedness. And so Joab, he knows, man, David, if I do this and only one man dies from this plan of yours, everybody's going to know what happened. They're going to know that I sent him off to die. And if I tell anybody, they'll know that you sent him off to die. So he is trying to insulate the king and himself from what this looks like. So now you also have this whole new plan of deviousness in this whole mess. And so because of that, additional soldiers were killed. And now Joab sends a note back to David in verse 19. Report all the news of the battle to the king. But he might get angry and ask, why did the troops go so close to the city walls? Didn't they know they would be shooting from the walls? Then tell him, Uriah the Hittite was killed too. So the messenger went to Jerusalem, gave the complete report to David. The enemy came out against us and in the open fields, and we chased them back to the gates, and the archers shot off the walls at us, and some of the king's men were killed, including Uriah the Hittite. Well, tell Joab not to be discouraged, David said. The sword devours this one today and that one tomorrow. Fight harder next time and take the city. Okay? Verse 25 in today's vernacular would be like saying, if you're going to make an omelet, you're going to break some eggs. Okay? It's like, oh well, we had this plan, it got finished, but we broke some eggs in the process. Okay? So he has developed this callousness against his own people and his own actions and the actions of others. So again, all David wanted to do was to take care of Uriah, and in the end, all these people die. So at this point, David finally thinks it's over. Uriah is gone. After a whole week of mourning, he marries Bathsheba. A little quick, right? And because he does that, he's thinking to himself, in about 8 months when that baby comes, the calendar will be kind of close enough that most people will think, oh, okay, that's possible to be above board, right? Although there will be some suspicion. And there's also a few people that know the details, right? So that brings us to our next point. And Steph, you're going to love this word. This word, she's going to go, ooh, that's my favoriteest. Sin suppurates when we think we succeeded in the cover-up. All right? Anybody in here know suppurate? This is what suppurate means. It's a medical term talking about an infected wound that generates pus. Okay? It's the nasty wounds. It's the wounds that stink. It's the wounds that cause your stomach to churn. Okay? When I was 12, there was nothing I wanted more in the world than to be a veterinarian. I spent, from the time I was 8 till this point, learning all I could about the anatomy of animals, how to do injections. We raised hogs. I spent my time learning about sickness and how to treat different animals for different things. And when I was 12, we had a farrow to finish hog operation. And so in our barn, we had 12 sows farrowing, having baby pigs. And one of them got sick. And she kept going downhill and downhill, and she had been in there long enough that my dad knew something was wrong. And so he called me from the house and said, come down, I need your help. Well, in the process of her getting sick, her entire litter died inside of her and started to rot inside of her. Needless to say, after I witnessed the smell and the disgust of what we had to do to try and save this sow, I decided veterinarianism was not probably what I wanted to do. Okay? Now, mind you, I had handled abscesses, I had handled prolapses, I had handled castrating pigs, I had all of these things, but that was way beyond anything I was prepared for, and I lost everything I ate for the last month. That is the picture of sin when it begins to putrefy when we try and hide it. And I go into that because I want you to understand that is the stench that God sees and smells when we're in the midst of sin. We may have relief for a while, okay? Oh, it's all covered up, I can breathe easy, right? But we don't realize how the weight of our conscience will continue to pour onto us more and more and more. Okay? Let's look at David. He's thinking, every time he walks out on that balcony and he sees where Bathsheba was bathing, and it's reminding him of his sin. Every time he walks past his bed where he did the deed, that weight keeps pouring down on him. Every time he sees one of the servants that helped him sneak her in and out of the palace, he's wondering, who have they told? Every time he writes a note to Joab, he's remembering the death sentence of an innocent man. And so this weight keeps pouring on him. He probably had to pay off some of those servants to keep their quiet. He maybe even had to threaten death. After all, he did it before, right? We don't know any of that for fact because it's not in there. But there's a whole year that happens between the end of chapter 11 and the start of chapter 12. So, there's a saying about the speed of God's methods when bringing about justice and repentance. It is that God's wheels grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. And this is what that means. It means they don't turn very fast, but what they crush turns into powder. There's nothing left. And there's about a whole year where these wheels are turning. Chapter 11 ends with this sentence, "But the Lord was displeased with what David had done." And during that time, the wheels of God were turning and putting on pressure on this festering wound of sin until Nathan the prophet appears before David. And he begins with this story in verse 1 of chapter 12. "There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle, and the poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he had bought. He raised that little lamb and grew it with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day, a guest arrived at the home of a rich man, but instead of killing one of his own animals, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it. David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole, having no pity." This is the point where David turns to pulp. In verse 7. "Then Nathan said to David, 'You are that man! The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I appointed you as king over Israel. I saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house and all of his wives and the kingdom of Israel and of Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done such horrific deed? You have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites and stolen his wife. From this time on, your family will live by the sword because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Because of what you have done, I will cause your household to rebel against you. I will give your wives to another man before your very eyes, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did secretly, but I will make this in public for all of Israel to see. Then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And David replies, yeah, right? But the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for this sin. Nevertheless, because you have shown utter contempt for the word of the Lord, your child will die. So over the next week or two, David's son becomes deathly ill. David goes into what appears to be a pit of despair. He locks himself in his room, he stops eating, he quits bathing, he quits changing his clothes, and he is crying day and night to God that he would spare his son. And at the end, all the servants are concerned because they're thinking, what's going to happen if this child dies? And then when he does, they say, how can we give him the news? He's in such despair now. What will he do to himself when he finds out he's dead? And in the midst of all this, David hears them speaking and whispering, and he puts two and two together, and he asks, the child has died, hasn't he? And he says, yes, he has died. So David gets up, washes himself, he goes and has something to eat, and it's life as normal. And the servants are all so confused because they said, David, how is it you could be in such despair when he's still alive, but when he's dead, it's like nothing happened? And he says, because while he was still alive, there was a chance that God would change his mind. But now that I know that God's justice is just, what the Lord has done, he chose to do because of what I had done, and so now I just must continue on. During this time, David writes Psalm 51. Many of you have probably read it. It is the perfect description of restoration. And from it we get these very famous stanzas. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a loyal spirit in me. Do not banish me from your presence, and don't take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and make me willing to obey you. The life cycle of restoration is so beautiful because it doesn't make God reconciled to us. It makes us reconciled to God. Because God doesn't have anything to reconcile. So that brings us to the life cycle of restoration. The first part of the life cycle of restoration is to confess how you wronged God and ask him for your forgiveness. We stop trying to hide or justify our sin. That's the first thing that we do. In verse 4, David says, against you and you alone I have sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight, and you will be proven right in what you say, and your judgments against me will be just. Okay? This is David's point in that psalm where he's saying, I am 100% wrong. You are 100% right. I want to bring myself back close to you. The second thing is that we need to turn back to God's ways. Look in verse 12 and 13. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and make me willing to obey. Then I will teach your ways to rebels, and they will return to you. Turn back to God's ways to the point that you're willing to bring others into God's ways as well. The third thing, receive the forgiveness that God gives. All right? This is where a lot of people stop. They sit and they ask forgiveness and they confess and they ask forgiveness and they confess and they ask forgiveness of the same thing over and over and over again, all the time thinking, there's no way that God can forgive me for this one. I've done it so many times, this one's going to be too much. But what we have to really have to understand is that what Jesus is faithful to forgive, we need to be faithful to receive. What Jesus is faithful to give, we need to be faithful to receive. The Bible says that he is free to forgive as long as we come and ask. And the last step, we want to thank God for his forgiveness. We want to rejoice for the restoration that he provides. It's impossible to do this step if we didn't do the previous one. Okay? So now, We all have incidents in our life that are like David's. It may not be of a sexual nature, right? But the real question is, what are we going to do with it now? The big idea for today is restoration is wonderful, but faithfulness is best. If there is a way that we can not do what David did, and at the point of temptation to turn away and be able to get rid of this whole lucid mess, that is God's plan. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, God will not tempt us beyond what we can bear. Rather, he will give us a way to escape. Sin does not happen at the moment that you fall victim to temptation. That's what everybody thinks. But it doesn't happen at the moment that we fall victim to temptation. It happens at the moment that we linger too long at temptation's threshold. That moment that David stood on his roof and glared and stayed looking and began planning, that was the moment sin began. The longer you stand at temptation's threshold, the greater the desire builds, clear down deep in the pit of your being. And some of you know this driving desire, right? I gotta have it. I gotta do it. Let me ask you something. How many of you, by show of hands, have ever escaped something by standing still? The only way that you can escape something is to flee. Okay? And that is what 1 Corinthians 10:13 is talking about. God gives you a way of escape. When you find yourself in that situation, that you're at temptation's threshold and you feel that desire building in you, drawing you to step over its edge, that's the moment that you say, wait, there's an escape hatch right here, and take it. If you've fallen victim to having been in the pit of sin, let me try this again. If you find yourself having fallen in the pit of sin, don't figure out a way to justify it or handle it. Okay? If you're spending time trying to convince others that what you did is fine, there's no problem with it, right? You're going to justify it to them. If you're trying to figure out a way to cover it up, then you are a deceiver. Who does God call the deceiver? If you're planning to spin cover-up stories about what you have done, that makes you a liar. Who does God call the father of lies? And if you're trying to figure out how you can have what you know you shouldn't have, then your heart is full of lust. Who did God cast out of heaven because he couldn't have the one thing that he wanted, which was to be equal with God? The answer to all three of those is Satan. The goal in being a Christian is to grow to be more and more like Christ, and less like Satan. So, that's all great to know, right? But what do we do with that? So instead of doing what David said, worship team, if you could go ahead and come on up. I have these three things to suggest. First, stop doing it. Now that always sounds so easy, right? Oh, just stop doing it. You don't need to do it anymore, just stop. I'm not talking about stopping the habit of doing it, stopping from doing it forever. I'm saying in that moment, and you hear that woodpecker of the Holy Spirit on the back of your head saying, McFly, McFly, okay, wake up. You've got your escape hatch right over here. Take it. Just stop. That's the moment. Just stop. It's your opportunity. If you find yourself leading somebody or following somebody into a bedroom and you're not married to that person, just stop. If you find yourself in a store getting ready to pocket something and walking out, stop. If you find yourself trying to think of a way to get out of trouble, stop. Because all of those things are going to bring you closer and closer to this putrefaction process of sin. The second thing, you're going to ask for forgiveness. You're going to turn to God and you're going to say, Lord, I need your help. I need you to forgive me for this desire that has built in me. I need you to change me. I need you to do what I can't in me. And guess what? That's his job. It says that Christ makes us a new creation. It doesn't say that we have to change ourselves. It says he will change us if all we do is rely on him to make the change. And the last thing is we got to put up some safety guards. Okay? If we have an area of temptation in our life that is too much for us to handle, guess what? It's too much for us to handle by ourselves. We need to have some safety guards put up. If that means that, you know what? When Pastor and Amy and I were dating, we got to the point that, you know what? We can't stay out until 10:30 or 11 o'clock after it gets dark and there's nobody around. If you ask Amy how we ended up staying celibate until we were married, you know what she's going to say? Because of me. And she'll gladly offer that up. And it's because I had a line that I wasn't going to cross. Choose you this day whom you're going to serve. That's the only part of that verse you need to know. Choose today who you're going to serve. Because when you walk up to that threshold of sin, if you haven't made that decision, the answer is going to be yes. I was a camp counselor with a bunch of 5th and 6th graders. And at the same time, some 3rd and 4th graders. So I had 27 boys all by myself between 2 rooms with the pass-through door. And about 11 o'clock at night, the door was cracked because, I understand things. And so I heard this whispering. So I was like, what are they talking about? And all of a sudden, they were talking about drinking. And finally, somebody said, hey, have you ever seen dirty pictures? By this time, I was standing in the door, and they didn't even see me. And I said, I'd like to know the answer to that question. Everybody in that room, their eyes about this big. You didn't need any night lights because it was all reflecting off their light. Okay? And they thought that I was going to come down on them. But the reality is, I wanted the answer to that question. And I used that verse, and I told them, you have to choose today before you're in that situation. Because when you're surrounded by that temptation and by that peer pressure, the answer is going to be yes. You won't have within you what you need to say no. You've got to put up whatever safety guards you need for that to happen. So as the worship team leads us in this song, I want us to take a moment. I want us to look and identify areas that God may be talking to you about. It may be of sexual nature. It may be of envy. It may be of a lying spirit. It may be of any number of things. But this is the truth. Sin is sin. When Amy and I did children's ministry, we had this thing we called the sinometer. And on it, we painted a 1 through a 12, and we asked the kids, okay, killing somebody, what level of sin is that? How about lying? How about stealing a cookie? And on the back side of it, we wrote, sin is all the same to God. And the problem with the church, when I grew up in it, is we were never bluntly described situations like what I just did. The idea of talking about sex in church, you'd have had the grandmas falling over, not by the power of the Holy Spirit either. They had to fainted under their own vapors, right? The vapors would have got them. But this is the thing. If we don't get to the point that we can talk about sin as openly as we can talk about salvation, then we've lost everything. Because where there is shadow, that's where Satan lives. So let's go ahead and, if you guys would lead this song, and then I'll come back up.